we've also recently there's a recent paper that's out by Lincoln and et al. And they looked at individuals who had tumors. Well, individuals who had tumors, they had no family history necessarily. They didn't think that they had a familial cancer syndrome. And they found out that over 30% of the individuals who had a tumor without family history, not a big red flag of a family, had germline variants, which means that that individual who had the kidney tumor or the thyroid tumor actually had a familial predisposing genomic variant. So the level of, in cancer at least, the level of predisposing genomic variants out there that are raising our susceptibility to tumors is much higher than we believed. Like for the past 30 years, we've been quoting 10 to 15% of cancers are familial. That is, they're caused by an individual carrying a cancer gene in every cell of their body. And because the mutation occurs in every cell of the body, the probability of the cancer occurring is pretty high.
Wow. That is a lot higher than I was expecting too. I didn't know.
Isn't it high?
That is very high.
Yeah, it is shocking. I actually had the class that's meeting today read that paper, and one of the questions was, "Are you surprised?" And the answers were no. I'm like, really?
No.
What? Why not? You should be surprised.
I was shocked.
It's surprising. It's a lot. It really is a lot. The background is quite large.
Definitely. Well, I guess we could back up too and talk about how these cancer mutations sort of arise as time goes on and how random they are and whatnot. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. Let's talk about cancer genetics. So we talk about cancer. We say cancer is a genetic disease. That's not all purely true, but for the most part, there are changes in so-called cancer genes, mostly those of the category oncogenes and tumor suppressors that have mutations in them or pathogenic variants that cause changes in the outcome of those genes. Okay, so with the tumor suppressor, those particular proteins are in your cell to stop the tumor, right? So they're suppressors. So if you lose the suppressor, the cancer cell is allowed to replicate whenever it wants, as much as it wants, and that can lead to cancer and transformation. The other large category are oncogenes, and they're important genes in embryonically and for growth, but they're not supposed to be activated all the time. And once mutations occur in those oncogenes, they can either be promoted to be, again, on all the time with an on switch and no off switch, or they can actually translocate around the genome and make new cancer genes. So those are the sorts of genes that we study in cancers. And the two categories of cancers that we talk about are these so-called familial cancer syndromes. And everybody's heard of BRCA1 and BRCA2. It's really popularized in the media. So with those particular cancer genes, those individuals who have changes have them in all the cells of their body. So when they get cancer, they're going to get an earlier onset cancer. They might get it bilateral cancer or cancers in various places in the body because their risk is so high because a cancer gene is mutated every place. As opposed to the average individual who gets cancer because after a particular period of time, their cells are exposed to replication and UV and breathing radon and other, nitrous oxide from your gas stove and everything else that we're exposed to. So we have mutations, and the more mutations we have in a particular place, we can access, we can get tumors. And we're all familiar with the fact that we know sunlight causes skin cancers and different sorts of environmental exposures cause cancers.
Mm-hmm. And so there are both germline and somatic variations, right?
Right.
I mean, so what are the differences between the somatic and germline variations?
Well, they're pretty much the same genes, right? They're the same genes, or the same tumor suppressors and cancer genes, but in the germline ones, individuals have changes all through their body, and it is a risk to their children and could be a risk to their siblings as well. So if you've got a family mutation, then you have a risk to the rest of the family. With somatic, there's a tumor, and it occurs because of bad luck or bad exposures, etc.
Mm-hmm.
and they tend to those somatic cancers tend to occur later in life than the genetic ones and the familial ones, and they tend to be an isolated tumor as opposed to like a tumor in each breast or a tumor in kidneys, 2 kidneys, etc.
Yeah. And for people that are worried about germline variants, how would they go about maybe finding out if they're at risk or if someone in their family is at risk?
You know that I like that question. I think okay, so I just told you that 30.7% of people who had a tumor have a familial mutation, which is a bit shocking. So you might want to know whether you had a familial mutation. I think to do that, I would contact a genetic counselor in a cancer center and get set up to it's just a swab, and there would be a panel of 82 to 85 genes that could be tested, and you could know whether you're at high risk for carrying one of those gene mutations. On the other hand, you could contact some of these laboratories, the good CLIA laboratories, you can contact directly, and they have their own genetic counselors. And the reason you want the genetic counselor is once you have the result, how to interpret that result. Like if you don't have the mutations, our worry is that, well, you won't go for the screening. You don't think you're at risk, right? You won't get the colonoscopy or the mammography or the endoscopy that we're suggesting you get, right, in the medical community. Okay, so the patient needs to be, or the subject needs to be counseled that, great, that's great. You don't have greater than average risk, but you're still a person living in this world, and so you have risk where individual, and if you have a mutation, then you'd want to be referred to a proper oncologist so that you can make sure that your screening is more appropriate. So your screening wouldn't be 45 years of age for a colonoscopy. If you had an APC or a Lynch gene, it would be earlier.
Right. So these 82 to 85 different variants that you could test, is that something that's random or very specified for that individual?
So this panel test is composed of cancer genes. Many of them are tumor suppressors, many of them are oncogenes, and also those genes, when mutated, can cause faulty DNA repair. So our DNA is broken all the time, and it needs to be repaired properly. If it's not repaired, cells die, or they can become a tumor. And so so there's a panel of known genes and known changes in those known genes that have caused tumors before in the population.
Mm-hmm. And this is just like, we know that these are the genes that would lead to this cancer in this patient.
Right.